Hi, this is MarkLittle. I'm going to play an interview that I just completed with a friend of mine, business consultant, mentor of mine. I'll tell you about him in a minute. But I think if you follow my methods or if you follow the strategies that I recommend, I think you're going to really like this interview. Because he's a friend, he was able to pull out things from me that I don't talk about a lot as it relates to business and how I accomplished very specific things that financial advisors who are delivering truly comprehensive financial services struggle with all the time. I think you'll enjoy this. The interview was with a friend of mine named Perry Marshall. If that name sounds familiar, it should. He's the author of the book 80/20 Sales and Marketing. If every financial advisor out there hasn't read it yet, I'm very disappointed. It's really one of the most seminal books that impacted me. It's one of three books that were the most important to me and my career. So Perry Marshall wrote the book on 80/20 sales and marketing. He also wrote a book after that called Detox, Declutter, Dominate. It's a short book. What inspired Perry was two things. One is in the book 80/20 Sales and Marketing. If you've read that, you know that 20% of your activities drive 80% of your results. If you focus on the most productive 20% of the activities that you do, you could work 2 days a week and get 60% more accomplished than you do now. But the opposite of that is true as well. 80% of your activities only deliver 20% of your results. So what he did was he took the best 20% of that big book, 80/20 sales and marketing, on that idea of detox, declutter, get the 80% out of your life that only produces 20% of the results anyway. In other words, give yourself a gift of time to do more creative thinking about how you're going to accomplish what you're out to achieve in your goals. So this interview you're going to love, and I hope you enjoy it.
Today you're in for a treat. You're going to meet Mark Little, and Mark is in our Roundtable 2024 group. He's also signed up for Roundtable 2025. And I've known Mark for must be 15 years. Met Mark different way than I meet most people who are clients. And I'll get into that story in a minute. Meanwhile, Kyler, do you have any words you want to say to everybody just before we get started?
I'm just so thrilled so many people are setting aside some time to hear Mark, flex a little bit, talk about some of the strides he's been able to make, why he's renewed all of that. I don't know if that's a spoiler or something, but it's always good to see a community that is actively happy to celebrate one another, right? For the most part, I'll be in chat, making sure all is well, posing any questions that I see that I think are relevant to everyone else's time. But otherwise, Mark, I'm thrilled you're here. Perry, take us away.
So, Mark is a mentor to financial planners, and he's going to get that in a little while. Meanwhile, I met Mark in northern Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, where the people there are called Yoopers, which is a play on UP, Upper Peninsula. And it's about 8 hours north of Chicago, and there's no electricity up there. And we were both at the same daddy-daughter camp, and his daughter and my daughter are the same age. And back then they were, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something. And Mark and I just got to having conversations. We were in the same cabin. And I want to say maybe a year or two later, Mark resurfaced. He said, Perry, I think I could use your help. And he did a year of private client. And then about, I guess a year ago, Mark joined Roundtable. because he wanted to do another evolution of his business. And that to me is an interesting story, because a lot of people, they buy a book, or they see a YouTube video, or they hear a podcast, or they sign up onto an email list. And in this case, we're just sharing a cabin where there's no electricity. So that's the interesting story of how we originally became friends. But what I would like to start with is, I would like Mark to go way back before any of that and explain, Mark, you made a transition from being a ordinary financial planner to being somebody who actually impresses clients. And the truth about financial planners is most of them are not very impressive. I've had bad experiences with not very responsible financial planners at least twice. So Mark, I'd just like you to tell your first person version. You were telling it in Dallas, by the way. In Fort Worth, you told a really great version to the people at the Perry Marshall Live. So I don't know if you remember exactly what you said, but that was just a really interesting story. And I think our folks would love to hear that.
My entry into the world of being a financial advisor was pretty traditional. I went to college. I'm in Texas, so I went to college in one town in Texas. And after I got out, I was interviewing around, and I got hired by a Wall Street based firm, but not up on Wall Street, down in San Antonio. So I moved from Fort Worth to San Antonio, and where I became a financial advisor for 30 years. I was very traditional. The problem that I had was I was an introvert, and I thought you got hired by a Wall Street firm. They managed wealthy people's money. I had been tracking stocks and bonds since I was 12 years old. I was one of those math geeks. I thought they're going to train me how to manage money for wealthy people. That's not what the job is. They immediately threw me on the phone cold calling, and they said, go find rich people. Hey, kid, we'll manage the money. You just go find wealthy people. So I was an introvert, and I almost got fired every day. Once a week, it was a routine. I had to go into the branch manager's office, beg not to be fired. This went on for over a year, but I kept telling him, I'll figure this out. I'll figure this out. What I decided to do, because I refused to cold call, I didn't have any friends that were wealthy. All my friends were broke college kids, just like me. I just moved to a new town, San Antonio. So I knew about 12 people, but I figured if these friends of mine aren't wealthy, I bet they know at least one wealthy person. It was my young, in my 20s version of everybody's a referral source, but nobody actually taught me that, but it worked. I got people I know to introduce me to people that I don't know. Long story short, by the second year, I had gotten rid of the Wall Street based company because I figured that world is not for me, but I went independent, but with a nationwide firm. We call them broker dealers in our industry. This was a nationwide broker dealer. Within 2 years of starting the business, I became the #1 top producer nationwide. The money was coming in well.
Hang on. Can I back you up? There's one little detail that I loved the other day. You devised an elevator speech that other people would repeat. You would tell your friends, you came up with a way to tell your friends a story that they could remember, that they would tell to a rich person.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a little bit about that and then go on?
It's kind of the age old question. I have financial advisors asking me the same question today. It's like, well, wait, let me get this straight. You were just hanging out with friends, grabbing coffee, catching up, and somehow that turned into business. How did that work? It's because I'm an introvert. When you're meeting with someone, you're just catching up over coffee or something. My instinct is don't talk. I'm an introvert. I like to hear them talk. So what's going on in your world? And they talk. I learned if I didn't say anything, they would eventually come up with what I now call the reciprocal moment, which is it'll occur to them subconsciously. They're doing all the talking and they'll say, "Oh, Mark, enough about me. What's going on with you?" I call that the reciprocal moment. So now, the spotlight's on me. I get to say whatever I want. I just learned in my 20s, I would tell a little vignette about a success story of a client. Like, yeah, a couple came in and really weird situation. They're in their 60s and her father has cancer. So she had to move out of the city to care for him. So now they're a marriage separated by 1,000 miles. So they came in and talked with me. We went through my process. I said, well, what if you didn't have to be separated? What if I could figure out how the one that is not caring for the father, the husband, I said, if I could show you that you can afford to leave your job and everything will work out and you guys can be together again. They said, oh man, I don't think that's possible, but that would be great. Long story short, we figured it out. They got back together. So I can't tell you how much I love being in a business where you can help people like that. What I just did right there is a 4-step process that I would do literally every time I met with anyone. Think of it as a commercial, but it's non-manipulative. I'm just telling a client success story. So what ended up happening is eventually people would start coming to me with significant financial issues. Then we talk business. So that's how that worked.
Okay, so that's very clever. That's very clever, and it's very deliberate and calculated. Like you're like, well, there's going to be that moment in the conversation where they finally getting around to asking me a question, and I know exactly what I'm going to tell them that they could remember, because what happened was you told them something they could remember.
It's a story. The key to, I call them vignettes. The key to crafting a vignette, I don't think of it as calculated. I like to think of it as prepared, like a Boy Scout.
Sure.
But anyway, so,
Sure.
it's a story following the hero's journey. You have a normal person in the normal world. They encounter obstacles. It's like all the ups and downs of the obstacle and the emotions. And in the end, they get on top of the issue and live happily ever after. So it's literally a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, which I now know the science of it. But back then I just thought, I think people will remember stories, and they did. So what I was in essence doing, and I didn't realize this till decades later, I'm actually training them how to explain me to other people. I know that now, but I didn't know it at the time. But I think it's important.
Very good. So you started getting clients and you started having some success, and then go ahead and continue.
Well, I was just going to say, you and Jack Bourne came up with the tactical triangle, where every business is broken out into 3 kind of stages or operations to make it work. I call it a little bit different. You can correct me on it, but I think you call it traffic. I kind of translated for my industry. It's lead generation, and then you have lead conversion, and then you have client service, which is you got to deliver on your promises or else they don't stay long. Okay. Yeah. So that's how I translated the tactical triangle. How did I do, Perry, on that?
Excellent.
Okay. So
5 stars.
So in that model, what I ended up being was very good at lead generation. I had no client conversion process other than winging it. And then I had to scramble to deliver on my promises. So if you're wondering, all you business owners out there that think, oh, I need lead generation. Well, this is what happens when you have lead generation and the other 2 are a mess. I ended up with 1,242 clients working 80, 90-hour weeks. I couldn't even meet with every client once a year, but I got into the business so that I could help people. It's like I woke up in, 1999, just hating the business. And I was thinking of leaving the business. That was my first transformation. Oh, did I mention I weighed 300 pounds? So I was this unhealthy, successful business owner who worked 80, 90 hours a week and wanted to help people, but hated his job. So how's that?
Okay. So somewhere between having, 50 clients and having 1,200 clients, something happened without you realizing it. Like but you probably have more perspective on it after the fact. Like, what was the trap that you didn't realize you were getting yourself into?
Well, I figured enough out on the lead conversion that obviously enough clients came to work with me. And back in those days, back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't think of clients as human beings, like individuals and families. They were accounts. Like in our world, how many accounts did you open this week? So every family has many accounts. Let's say an average family has 5 accounts: his account, her account, a joint account. He has an IRA, she has an IRA. So there's 5 accounts. Well, I was opening up 3.5 accounts per week. That's how I became #1 advisor nationwide. But while I was good in the meetings, apparently it was effective, compelling for them because they came to work with me. It was like taking a pitchfork. And once they're in, you just throw them onto the pile with the other clients where they got to fend for themselves. I kind of learned on Wall Street, you hand the management over to important wealth managers up in New York. So it ended up, they weren't people. They were just numbers. They were an account number for my nationwide broker dealer firm. I think what happened is I started with a small pile and then by doing lead generation so well, I woke up in 1999 with a massive pile of 1,242 clients, each with about 5 accounts, and I was miserable. We were actually managing the money well, but the clients never talked to me. And I mean, it's just not a good situation, not a good business, a pretty dumb business model, if I have to say.
And so what caused you to do something about it? Like, not everybody who wakes up in that situation ever solves it. What was different about you?
I have somebody on my team right now, chief technical officer, who's happy to share. At one point he was an alcoholic, hit bottom, and lived on Skid Row. How many people have a leader in their company who was homeless at one time? But yeah, he tells me about his experience in AA, and I asked him the same question you asked me. I said, "What happened?" He said, "I think I had to hit bottom." By the way, I will say there's more wisdom in an AA meeting there is in the average university these days. So the things he told about AA, were really wise things, which, not to jump forward, but I think of RoundTable as my AA. So, but back at that time, back in 1999, I hit bottom. I was working 90 hours a week. It was unacceptable. I had to do something, or else I literally was going to leave the business and do something else. So that's what happened.
Mm. So what did you take apart and put back together? Or like, what, I wish I was more conversant with AA language, but I get in AA, don't they say, I endeavored to right all the wrongs or make
Yeah,
amends or something?
I had to make amends to those 1,242 people. Although it's funny, talking 80-20, 80% of them were perfectly happy and didn't know what I was talking about because they don't think about their accounts all the time, their financial affairs. But yes, I made amends. My commitment to myself at that time was, I'm going to do right by these 1,242 people. I'm going to select the ones that I can serve well. I'm going to go out in my community. I'm going to find a really good, younger financial advisor that I like their process. I'm going to recommend that 80% of my clients go work with someone else. And some did, some didn't, but I feel like I did right by all of them eventually.
So you got rid of a bunch of clients. You 80-20.
Yeah, 1,240. Well, I had 1,242. I politely disengaged from 1,226.
Wow.
So I think the message of that whole transformation, that one back in 1999 and this one this year, is I think the message is coaching. I think some of the most successful people I've ever known, they all had coaches and mentors, and they had people that gave them an outside perspective, but not just anyone, brilliant people. That's what happened in 1999. The chairman of the board of the nationwide firm that I was with, he was a little bit worried. Your #1 producer says, I'm going to leave the business. he thinks I got to do something. So what he did was at the nationwide conference, we gather every year for this big nationwide conference. That year it was in Newport, Rhode Island. Unbeknownst to me, he hired the most well-known and influential business coaches, business trainers, for financial advisors in the world at that time, a guy named Bill Backrack. So Bill Backrack came and they hired him to do a keynote speech at that conference. So I'm just sitting there in the audience like anybody else listening. And he was brilliant. He started talking about focusing the relationship on the client's values, not their goals, because goals are just a mechanical thing. What's really matters is the why behind the goals. And if you start with the values and then you start asking them their goals, they will make the connection between their values and their goals. And it'll be a great experience for them making that connection. So I loved all that. I could tell as he was talking, the hair on my back of my neck started relaxing. And I thought, now that would be great, you know? So right after his keynote, they had a top producer luncheon. So everybody went off to lunch, but they had like 40 top producers at this luncheon right after the keynote. And they sat me right next to Bill Backrack.
Wow.
And he said, "Well, nice to meet you, Mark. Tell me about your business." And I proceeded to tell him this horror story of this house on fire. And he was listening patiently. And I can only think now how that must have sounded. It was like, he just thought, oh, fine. I'm having a good year. You know, he's used to what you say at a conference. And I just unloaded. I just vomited my story all over him. And he patiently listened. And at the end of that, he said the key to what fixed everything. He said, "Sounds like your heart's in the right place. Sounds like you actually do a good job for your clients. Why don't you just do a whole lot more for a whole lot fewer clients?" And I'm like, wow, it's like lightning struck. It was such an obvious thing in retrospect, but I had never thought of that, because on Wall Street, you're taught never to turn away money. If it's a $2,000 IRA, you take it. If it's a $2 million family, you take it. So you just take it, take it, take it. And the more I thought about that, it changed everything. So I hired him. I started working with him over the next 2 years. After I politely disengaged from 1,225 families, I retained 17. So after, I started April 28th of 1981. So from 1981 to 1999, I mean, I was really starting over, and it was terrifying.
So in the chat, is anybody else kind of impressed that he got rid of 90% of his clients? Like, if that isn't kicking the bottle, oh my goodness. Like, I think you need to say a little more about what that was like. Like, I mean, talk about AA.
Right. Well, this experience that my business coach was teaching was a different lead conversion process. My lead conversion process was, if I generated a lead, which I was really good at, then my lead conversion process is, well, then you meet with them for 3 meetings, 60 to 90 minutes each time. You kind of go through what they're trying to accomplish, and you do a meeting on their current assessment. You get a kind of a feel for what they currently have in place. Then you have a third meeting to decide whether or not you're going to do business together. Now, unbeknownst to me, that's crazy. I mean, that's like 3 hours to 4 hours over 3 separate meetings. What Bill said in his process involved a single meeting, 60 minutes. They bring all their documents. Both spouses are there. You start with their values. You ask them what they're trying to do with all this money. Then you establish their goals. At the end of that 60 minutes, it's obvious what's going to happen next. Either everybody agrees we should do business together, or everybody agrees we should not be doing business together. So I went from a 3-meeting, 90-minute process to a 1 hour making a decision on the spot. It was a great experience for them, Perry. And even the people that it wasn't a good fit and we didn't work together, they valued the experience so much that I started charging $500 for that meeting. I figured it's a value, and I have this crazy mindset that I think it's unprofessional to add value without charging. It's kind of a professional ethic of mine. So I started charging for that meeting. I just thought it was a win-win-win. So with these 1,225 clients, now that I had mastered this experience, I just sent them all an email, and I had to do this in tranches because you can only handle so many a week. But
Yeah.
I said, why don't you come in? I'd like to conduct your financial roadmap. And I was going to use that meeting to go through the values and the goals exercise. And then instead of the point where you ask them, we've come to the point in our time together where you get to decide whether you want to hire me to make your plan a reality. Instead of that at the end, like I normally do, I just explain the situation. My health is bad. I'm working 90 hours a week. I've got to do something. Your situation is very simple. I've identified me 20 years ago. I've identified a younger advisor who's hungry, who will give you the time you deserve. You get the idea. So I made a case. And what's interesting, there was an 80-20 there now that I think about it. So 80% ignored the email. I only ended up doing 20% of those financial roadmap meetings. And the other 80%, I ended up having to send them an email saying, been trying to meet with you, but you've got 30 days to move your account. I mean, you try to do it the right way. And for those that literally don't care, I gave them an out. I sent them the contact information for another advisor and so forth.
So, Mark, I've sat through quite a few financial planner meetings, and I've sat there while they flip their big presentation board notebook thing with the AAA and not quadruple A readings, which frankly I think are BS. And of course my marketing kicks in. I'm like, oh, this is awful. But basically, there's a lot of posturing and there's a lot of pageantry and it's all kind of made up. And you somehow shifted your entire energy, your delivery, your intention away from what all of these, I don't know, Morgan Stanley and, all those kind of guys, they have a certain way that they do it. And it's like older than the 10 Commandments. It's just can you explain the mind shift just a little more? Because there was something that connected to human beings after you started. Can you explain that more?
The starting point of that revelation actually goes back to the Wall Street based firms. When I was going in every week begging not to get fired, I had to tell them, well, then, Mark, what's your plan? Like, if you're not going to jump on the phone and call $60 a day like we ask everybody else to, what are you going to do? It took me a year to figure it out, but I read a book back in 1981. I don't know if you've ever heard of a business author named Tony Alessandra.
Okay.
But he wrote a book called Non-Manipulative Selling. And he wrote this book with a guy named Rick Barrera. And I read this when I was literally right out of college. And the book premise was, why does anybody sell? If you're good at what you do, there's a market out there screaming for this. They're actually looking for you. Why wouldn't the process be you're just trying to seek out the people who are already looking for what you're doing? Like, that's a non-manipulative sales process. And that's how I stumbled across this telling stories. I also developed a really keen ear for when somebody's catching up, like we're grabbing coffee and they're catching up and they say, oh yeah, the next door neighbor family and we went on a boating outing for the weekend. We had 8 kids. It was quite an adventure. And I have a fine sense of active listening when there may be a significant financial issue involved. And I said, wow, a trip like that must have set you back. He said, oh my gosh, we're still paying for it. It was, whatever it was at the time. But I said, and I had a little process to get them to talk about the financial aspect of their story. And if they ended up at the end of that, they had a significant financial issue, I'd ask them, is that high, medium, or low priority to you, that problem? And if they said hi, I'd tell them, well, I have a process to resolve that. Takes about an hour, but I'd be happy to do that if that's something you'd like to do. But to your question, then flash forward when I was transforming my business in that 2 years from 2000 to 2002, values-based financial planning, which was Bill Backrack, my business coaches, that's his lead conversion process. He said, start the interview like this. And I'm going to try it with you, Perry, and we'll see how it goes. But just to tell you, in that 1 hour lead conversion, they do 80% of the talking. I only do 20% of the talking, and it's mostly questions. So I think that's part of the answer to your question. Forget all the slideshow, forget all the presentation. Like, there's nothing to present. If they have values that are driving their goals, then it's deep with them, So I want a summer house up in the Upper Peninsula. Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's important about a summer house to you? And they'd say, well, it's not so much the house. It's like, we've got 8 grandkids. We just want a place where the whole family can come and gather. It's like a family compound. That's what I want. So you're connecting values with their goals. When you go through all their goals, if they have deep-seated values that are driving this, then, this is them choosing me, not the other way around. I found that I'm the only person they ever met with who ever even asks, not even interested. But the conversation starts like this. So we'll practice this. Perry, what's important about money to you?
Money says a lot about who I am by how I spend it and how I get it.
Okay. And what's important about being clear on who I am and how I spend my money to you?
Parable of the talents. To those to whom much is given, much is expected. We didn't rehearse this, by the way. I had no idea.
No. So just to be clear, what's important about having clarity on who you are and how you're spending money is much is expected of you?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's important to you, right? Knowing that you've done what's expected of you. I don't want to
knowing that I have done well and responsibly with what gifts and talents and resources I have been given.
I see. So knowing that I've done well, I get it. So what's important about knowing that you've done well to you?
Well, I have a family to care for.
Mhm.
When my dad died, he only had $100,000 of life insurance, which had to last mom the rest of her life. And that put her in a pretty tight spot. And so I don't want that to happen to my family. I also want the things that I create, like whether it's a company or a nonprofit foundation, or if it's just the way that my money gets used after I'm gone. I want that to be pointed in the best direction I can possibly point it. But I also that's later, and that's probably less important. What's more important right now is that I have as much freedom and latitude to do what I feel is important every single day of my life and not be pushed around by money or be under the foot of the man. Like, my worst nightmare when I was 25 was waking up when I'm 45 and being chained to a really stupid job because I need the health insurance. Like, that would be the worst way that I could turn out to be 45 years old. And so it's important to me to wake up every morning and do the things that I think are important to me and my family and the world, and to steward my time well, and not be caught in a squirrel cage of obligations, of stuff that I don't even care about.
Perry, let's flash forward. Let's say you're at the end of your life, looking back over your life, and you were never on the squirrel cage. You have that sense of freedom your whole life. What's important about having that freedom to you?
So then I can be a Renaissance man.
Okay.
So, and a lot of people kind of know the things that I'm working on, and work on science projects and cancer projects and researching things and pushing the boundaries of knowledge and being with really interesting people who are also doing interesting things, because that's exponential.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's being in the right room, which requires you have to have the time and the long leash to be in the right room,
Mm-hmm.
and the means of making connections to other people and doing something that they consider valuable. So that's what freedom is really about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can see how doing something that's important to others is important to them. But again, let's say you're at the end of your life and you were a Renaissance man, you in your own mind, and you had an exponential impact on the world. What's important about being a Renaissance man to you?
I think the world in 50 or 100 years can be way better than it is. I think there's a lot of problems that we could solve, and they could no longer be a problem. Like, hunger is really no longer a problem for the majority of the world. And where there are hungry people, it's politics. It's not crops.
Or corruption?
And I think there's a whole bunch of other problems that are like that people live with every day, that civilization, humanity could get way beyond. And I could play a role in that, and I could be remembered for that. And my grandkids or great grandkids could hear stories about that, about grandpa or great grandpa, and they can follow the example, as can others.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you do what you're supposed to do, you don't know how many other people will be enabled to do what they're supposed to do.
In the interest of time, I'm going to tell you where this whole thing would go, because I'm tempted to keep going. What you said at the beginning is, I want to provide for my family, and the situation with my father's unacceptable, so I'm fixing that. That's level one, values. Level two values is, I want to help the world, Renaissance man. So we got up to level two. I would continue this conversation, Perry, until we get to a level three value. Because I would say, well, I can understand how solving some of the world's problems is important to the world. What's important about having a hand in solving some of these problems to you? And if I continue with someone, at the end of it all, they'll say something like, because someday I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yes, I'm intimating that.
You get to a level three response, and I keep going until we get there. And you're there because you'll say something like that, and I'll say, so what's important about knowing that you've done well as a good and faithful servant? And your lips will move, but not there. We've come to the point where what you're thinking, you can't put into words. That's when you're done. And my question to you is, if we went on through the process and I asked you, so what are the goals requiring money and planning that you'd like to achieve? Let's say, hypothetically, you say financial independence, like a lot of people do. Can you see how those values would be connected to that goal? Like, has something to do with your family or something in those values, you're going to make a connection. That was the question you asked. Like, what did you do to flip the switch and make it all about them and not all about you and your presentation and everything? I've got to credit that to Bill Backrack. He's the one that developed that. It's a 1-hour structure, but what I appreciate about it, it's just asking better questions and not doing the talking. Let them talk.
So Kyler, you appeared.
Real quick, just tell me in chat, would you guys like a longer interview with Perry about who he is and what he values and perhaps why he started this whole thing in the first place? Can you just put that in chat? Just let me know if you're interested, because we could probably do that.
Well, Mark, I will let
this,
you.
this took a left turn that you didn't expect, which I love.
I'm open to doing whatever you want to do here, Mark. So, I figured we'd end at the top of the hour, but we don't have to. So,
Well, I was going to wrap up my story, that 2 years where I implemented that, just to say that after I flipped the switch, got some really solid, good coaching from Bill Backrack, then I pared down my business to 17 ideal clients. I was down to $340,000 a year in net earnings, which, looking at the 80-20, that's, if the 20% is 340,000, you're probably doing okay. So that's where I was on January 1st of the year 2000. I had this new business. I had 17 clients. I was going to build it up. My goal was 100 clients. I didn't know how long it would take, but I had the process. It was all dialed in. I could go off on the client service side. That was also part of the transformation. I hated the way the industry treated the clients. So everybody was kind of advising me, why don't you decide what comprehensive financial services means and build that out? I thought, I think I have a better way of doing it. The financial services industry likes to dictate to the public what they think they need.
yes.
So I spent 2 years paying for research, meeting with affluent families, answering the question, what would you like a relationship to look like with a high-end financial advisor like me? And these are people that weren't clients. Well, I did it with my 17. I created a focus group with them. But I asked a lot of affluent families, what would you like this relationship to look like? They were happy to share. I came up with 4 expectations that they swear don't exist on planet Earth. You can never find an advisor to do these 4 things. So it was just an eye-opening experience to me. But I literally built my business around that project. So I was the only advisor delivering the service the way the client wants it. We even went so far as to say, how do you like the statements that you currently get from your financial institutions? They hate it. Tell me what I really want to know. So we redesigned all the reports and statements. In the end, I had a business that was really designed around affluent people. I had a good process to the values-based financial planning process. We had better conversations. So in that 2 years, I went from 340,000 of net earnings in Jan 1 of 2000 to October 22nd of 2002, I was at 1.6 million. So this process, basically starting over in the business, was, the first renaissance for me. I mean, it really was. And I was putting in 40 hours a week instead of 80 or 90. But I was working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I worked 12 hours a day, 3 days a week, and I had Mondays and Fridays off. I mean, it was mainly just my reaction to working many, 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 many years, 80, 90 hours a week. So my life changed dramatically.
So I want to unpack several things here. First of all, so you hit bottom. You're working 90 hours a week with almost 1,300 clients. You're miserable. You're 300 pounds. You have an AA financial planner moment, and you say, I'm going to make amends. This has gotten out of control. I'm no longer able to manage this thing. I'm going to take a hatchet to it. You cut it down to 17 clients,
17 families. Yeah.
17 families, 300 some $1,000. And then you start rebuilding. I mean, really, you didn't do 80-20. You did like 95-5 or something. And you said, I'm just gonna insanely well serve a very few clients who have the ability to pay and who completely align with my values. And I can go through this whole values exercise, which it was a little startling to have you do it. I didn't know we were going to do this. And like the
I
chat
know you
blew
well
up.
enough, Perry. I thought you'd be fine.
The chat blew
I
up.
normally, yeah. Oh, it
And
did?
everybody's like, whoa, okay, like I'm really resonating with this. And then we would not, this would not be a complete conversation if we didn't have a rant about how thoroughly mediocre the financial services industry is and the slop that they serve up to people disguised as good financial advice and service, when in fact, like I had a horrible experience about 15 years ago with a financial planner who he laid out this big matrix of things that we were going to do. We're going to check this bucket, this bucket, this bucket. We're going to cover this risk. We're going to do all of this stuff. He sold me a whole life insurance policy and kind of disappeared. He hooked me up with a CPA who ended up not filing my quarterly taxes. And I ended up with $300,000 of IRS penalties. Now, I'm to blame for some of that, but had he done what he said he would do, I would have not have paid those IRS penalties. I would have not gotten hooked up with a completely incompetent accountant. And I would not be really angry when he emailed us 2 years later and asked for an appointment. And I wrote back to him and said, I have not gotten, after investing a bunch of money with you, I have not gotten so much as a Christmas card from you in the last 2 years. And suddenly you want an appointment. No, we are not having an appointment. And I'm just curious in the chat, how many people have had an experience with a financial planner that is anything like that? I'm just curious. It doesn't have to be that bad, but like, you know, they have their AAA, quadruple A ratings, and they have their notebook and their folder and their PowerPoint, and they're completely incompetent.
During that 2 years where I was asking affluent people, you know, what should this relationship look like? I have a file folder of stories just like yours and worse, Ponzi schemes, all kinds of things. But in the end, we're sitting here talking about my story like, oh, Mark's brilliant. He stumbled across all these ways to acquire clients and serve them better. And oh, Mark's great. To your point, I think I could credit the horribleness of the average financial advisor relationship with just as much credit for my fast growth. So there I was. And I want to remind you of something else about that period. Those of you that were around, 2000, you know, I'm all excited. The clock rolls over, Jan 1, the year 2000. We called it Y2K at the time. I was gung-ho, ready to build this new business. Well, first thing that happened was Y2K. Those of you who weren't alive, it was a thing. Everybody was really worried about this. And, you know, the idea that when the clocks roll over to the new century, you know, everything from, you know, banks locking up your money to Armageddon, nuclear missiles. Nike had a commercial with this guy jogging with listening to music, but behind him, there, like the zoo was letting out animals and everything was chaos in the tree. There's a tank rolling by and behind him. I mean, this is the Y2K era. Do you remember this, Terry?
Yes.
So Y2K happened first. Oh, did I mention the bubble burst on technology companies? So, you know, Y2K, that ended up being okay. We had the tech boom bust was kind of that next stage where, you know, all these famous companies like Microsoft, they lost, you know, dramatically dropped. And so we had Y2K, the tech bust. Then we had 9/11. And we had a 3-year recession. So that 3 years I'm talking about, I want you to think about this. I'm meeting with my new excited ideal clients. We're getting together every 4 months or so. And every time they come in for 3 years, the value of their accounts with me are down. We all excited. Next time they come in, the values are down. Values are down again. Values are down again. Values are down again. They all hung with me. I was on a mission more important than any of that. I explained to them how these are long term. Here's how this is going to work. And they stuck with the plan because their values mean more to them than any of the day-to-day machinations of the market. So that going from 342,000 a year to 1.6 million was during a horrible financial crisis where most financial advisors were not calling their clients and holding their hand. They were hiding under their desks, hoping the phone would stop ringing. So there I was on the move. And during that period, clients would fire their advisor on the spot and hire me in one meeting. I mean, I think all of this horrible stuff was really more a reflection on the advisors, their current advisor, than on me and my process. Or I think it played a role. What do you think?
Well, I feel like what you just described was they had a meeting with somebody who was alive and not the Walking Dead. Like, if I think about your story, when you hit bottom, you woke up and you stopped sleepwalking and you got real with yourself and you got rid of 1,200 clients.
I was red pilled.
You took the red pill. And people who have taken the red pill recognized another red pill person when they met one. And when the markets were going down, they're like, well, my financial advisor is a red pill guy. And then you had a meeting with them and you said, guess what? The markets are down again and your portfolio is down again. And we are playing a long game, not a short game. So you can jump ship and go somewhere else if you want. And that's fine. But I have a plan. I mean, is that about right?
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I have to mention about the 300 pounds. Did I mention that my business coach, Bill Backrack, had run Hawaii Ironman?
Ooh.
I don't think I mentioned that.
Okay.
So he made a comment to me. He said, Mark, you're doing great. Everything's really phenomenal. Have you ever wondered the image you're setting, just your life, like as far as discipline and can they trust their money with you? And it was just a question, but I told him, yeah, I think about that. 300 pounds, it sets an image, not anything about the weight, but he was concerned about my health. Every male in my family had a heart attack by age 50, on and on. So he was concerned about my health, and I wasn't going to do a Hawaii Ironman. I'll tell you that. But if you cut that in half, that's an Olympic marathon. If you cut the Olympic marathon in half, that's a sprint triathlon. I started running sprint triathlons. I ran the Accenture in Chicago and I became carnivore. I only eat meat or animal products, and I didn't diet. I didn't do anything. I just started running triathlons and eating meat without dieting. I went down to my high school weight and I have stayed there. So if anybody's wondering what's the secret, there's no secret. I just stopped eating processed food and I started, getting out of my desk chair occasionally. And that's all that it was. But I wanted to throw that in before we wrap.
Wow. Mark, are you okay if we go a little over?
Sure.
Okay. Kyler, did you have a question?
I do have a question from chat. I actually have several questions from chat, but one question that was reposted by Carrie. Thank you, Carrie. That is Anthony's question. In Perry's email about this event, he said you can only work with people willing to put skin in the game. What are examples of Mark's clients putting skin in the game?
Well, that was the breakthrough coming from RoundTable. So just for coherence, after that 2 years where I built to 1.6 million. I'd say in that next 10 years, somewhere in there, I met Perry. And we went to the daddy-daughter camp and got to know each other. It was a great experience. But in the camp, I said, I know who you are. And I'm sure he was used to that at the time. So after that, I joined the private client group, which is just Perry and me for a year. And it was transformational. The only reason I mention that is because you can tell me how far later, Perry, but we developed a real relationship at that point, and Perry would send me things just unsolicited. He sent me a book, or he'd send me and of course I love getting Perry's newsletter every month. They're entertaining and informational, but the point was he sent me a book somewhere on the way called The Star Principle. When that book came out, it was by a friend of his. It's Richard Koch, right? I think I was pronouncing his name incorrectly.
No, you're right.
Okay, so Star Principle by Richard Koch. I got this from Perry and I thought, oh, that's a nice gesture. I threw it on the stack by my nightstand with all the other books I haven't read yet. And it sat there for a couple of years. Then I interacted with Perry on something, and he mentioned the Star Principle. It might have been just in a webinar or something. And I thought, I think that's on my stack somewhere. So I went back, I read that book, and I'm like, oh my gosh. For one thing, this is kind of my story. I mean, Richard Koch, you can't touch this guy. But when you kind of think about my story, what he outlines in that book is more or less the path I followed. He says that a star company, you're number one in your market, and number two is so far behind in your rearview mirror you can't even see them. You're growing 10% per year, and you have a plan that will grow roughly with the market. And in my business, this is a big opportunity the next 20 years. I would say the last, since the turn of the century, has been great. If you think just about intergenerational wealth transfer, people have inherited something like $790 billion per year on average for the last 20 years. That's pretty good for financial advisors, because that's the moment when somebody wakes up and says, I used to have $1.80, now I have $5 million because daddy died, and I maybe I should get some advice. So, I got to say there's some demographic moves that really worked in my favor. But if we look at today, forget the past, and you look at the next 20 years, it's moving from 790 million to 4 trillion per year on average for the next 20 years. I'd say that's fertile territory for a star company. and with so much money, and it's concentrated, Perry, in the next 10 years. So I think the opportunity is now. I read that book, but I still didn't put it together with my clients. So Kyler's question was, what's the skin in the game of my clients?
Yes.
One of the things that happened in RoundTable, my first year in RoundTable this year, was lots of things transformed, including my fuzzy message I was communicating with my clients and potential clients. So, my story is compelling to people in our industry, but it's hard to put together what I put together. So the deciding factor in our industry, whether you work with Mark and learn all this stuff or you don't, because I teach everything that I implemented, is really how hard are you willing to work? The reality is you have to be willing to bust your tail for, a year to 3 years, kind of depends on how good you are and effective you are at implementing. But then you can take off the rest of your life. You're building a business that will sustain you. It's sustainable without you. So in this year in RoundTable, I started applying the STAR principle to my own clients. I just drew a line in the sand. I said, when we first meet, you want to work with me? Convince me that you want to be the number one financial advisor in your town. Are you currently? And if not, I'm only going to work with people that's their goal and they're willing to make the effort. And if you're willing to become a little star in your community, then I'll work with you. That was the answer to the question, Kyler. So the skin in the game is you will accomplish this or I won't work with you. During RoundTable, I developed an initial 12 weeks of our program, and it's working great. I tell a financial advisor if you work with me and you do everything I say to do for the next 12 weeks, if you haven't acquired an ideal client at the end of that period, then I'll give you your money back for what you paid over that 3 months. But you have to give me 20 hours a week of your time, and you have to do exactly what I say. Is that answer the question, Kyler?
Yes, very much so.
And it was all emulating Perry, who's done the same thing in RoundTable, which was very inspirational.
Well, I came home from Portugal 2 months ago, and I said, I'm taking a hatchet to RoundTable, and we are changing the formula. And I'm saying the same thing to my RoundTable members that Mark is saying to his clients. I'm saying this year, RoundTable is for people that want to be number one in their market and have a plan. Like, if we can't come up with a plan to make you a star, we're not going to take you. And we're going to have a plan to make you a star. And if you do what we tell you to do and you don't turn into a star, and we'll define exactly what that is in the whiteboard session, I'll refund 120% of your money. And you're going to be on the hook for doing all of the things that it takes to make it work. And we're only going to take serious people. And it has been really interesting to watch the voltage level of the entire group go up when we raised the expectations. And so, like, Mark sent me an email a day or two ago, and he said, so here's this checklist of things that I am now doing to ready myself to meet the standards of 2025 RoundTable. What's it been like from your side, Mark?
Well, I'm taking it seriously. I mean, for all I know, that was on the agreement for last year. I couldn't tell you. I didn't read it. But now that there's skin in the game, and as much as I got out of RoundTable this year, I really read the agreement. It had a checklist of things that you would do: fire a client or fire an employee, just all these things that you need to do to declutter and detox, prepare yourself for this RoundTable experience next year. One item on the list was something about clean up or declutter your inbox on your email. I can't remember exactly what it said, but I spent this last weekend, when I started, I had 1,300 emails in my inbox, 1,300. And on Monday morning, I had 0. So I had 0 inbox, and I just took a screenshot to brag. I said, I wanted Perry to know that I'm taking this seriously. So to go from 1,300 emails in the inbox to 0, that takes a little effort.
And it was a massive unsubscribe. So now his entire intake ecosystem of email it drops dramatically. We're requiring RoundTable members in 2025 to delete social media apps off their phone. You can do Facebook. You just have to do it on your desktop computer after 5 o'clock at night. You can't do it in the middle of the day while you're supposed to be doing your work or at the doctor's office or we're going to contain the things that gum people's gears up and keep them from thinking and keep them hypnotized and keep them taking the blue pill instead of the red pill. And then we're going to have specific expectations of each member based on their circumstances. And that's what we're looking for. And you can apply it, perrymarshall.com/elite, and see if you're a fit. And we'll have a whiteboard session and we'll go over where, do we think we can turn your business into a star this year or not? And that's how it works. Mark, you were going to say something.
The only other thing that occurred to me when you were talking was I've implemented daily Renaissance time. You may want to give a thumbnail sketch of that. But I would say in my first year of RoundTable, let's call it, I had good intentions, but I had Renaissance time maybe once every week or two. now doing this faithfully every day. I mean, even this interview, I spent a Renaissance time just thinking, what can I be grateful for about RoundTable? And that became the mental outline for this conversation. I wanted it to be compelling, but I wanted it to tell the elements of the story that I thought others might be able to learn from. And I really appreciate the Renaissance time, and I see the value of it now.
Well, one of the requirements this year is that every Roundtable member has to do Renaissance time 5 days a week for at least 10 minutes at the beginning of the day. So you're not in CNN and you're not in social media and you're not in your email box. You can do yoga, you can journal, you can walk your dog, but you got to do something meditative and nourishing to your soul for 10 minutes a day before you do everything else. And we require that. You can't invoke the skin in the game guarantee unless you're doing that 5 days a week. And people need discipline. They need accountability, and they need to know that somebody actually gives a crap about whether they're hitting their goals and whether they're doing their daily disciplines. And this is why 2025 is going to be an amazing year for the people that decide to join. So let's
you
Kyler,
walked through that 5 weeks ago when we were meeting for Roundtable, and I asked you, could I read scripture during that period? You say it's about listening. You said yes, but you got to have a quiet listening time, and that's the change that I made.
Yes, Kyler.
I want to ask a question, and I want to reiterate something. If you go just real quick, if you go to perrymarshall.com/elite, you can put forward for $100, not any other amount, a very minimal amount. We can assess the upward growth potential of your business. And if we see it, we will put into writing that you will grow very quickly under our guidance, or we will put money on the line for that growth.
Yeah.
It is really that simple. It's $100. Like we can all jump into, I can throw $100 at that question. Right? And I'm not Mr. Big Businessman. Now, I have seen this question many, many times. I've been waiting. I'm so sorry to keep you guys waiting for the right context. I feel like this is the right context. Mark, what are the 4 pillars / expectations your clients asked for?
That the 2 years that I spent studying this, some themes began to emerge, and I created an acronym on these 4 client expectations, things that they expect, but they've given up looking for anywhere. The acronym is P.A.C.T, P-A-C-T. When I work with a financial advisor, I say, you need to make an advisor pact pledge to your ideal clients. And PACT is an acronym. It's protection, attention, coordination, transparency. So just walking through Perry's story where the advisor never called him or anything, and he had this big tax surprise. Protection means you've got your clients back. You have nothing to sell. You are a conflict-free voice of advice for the client, and you're protecting them from people who are trying to sell them financial products and services. So you protect your clients. You've got their back. You pay attention. That means being proactive. So if something happens in the markets and things go down, you don't wait for the client to call you. You're paying attention. And when you meet with the client, you've already prepared the recommendations and action items that are required if they've drifted off track a little bit, because you're paying attention and you're proactively contacting your client. Coordination, that was one of the big frustrations with affluent people. I've got all these financial people. I've got an accountant. I've got an estate planning lawyer. I've got all these insurance agents. They're all trying to get my time. You will know nobody's raising their hand on that team to raise their hand and say, I will coordinate all these people. I'll create a comprehensive written lifetime financial strategy, which also doesn't exist, but I will share it with all your financial people, and I will coordinate to make sure that what they're advising you is perfectly aligned with your plan. And then transparency is just the complaint that there's so many hidden fees and, in insurance products and and investments and mutual funds and 401ks. Could somebody please just flush out and tell me what am I actually paying and all in? And so we created something called the Truth and Fees Report. It's an estimate every year of here's what you're paying, what you know and what you don't know, and here's what it's estimated to be over the next 12 months. Those are the four things. But the outcome is what was the powerful thing for the clients. Once they realize this is real and I can hire an advisor to make that pledge for these four things, the three outcomes that we pledge are you'll always be on track to your goals. You will have no financial surprises, and you'll make better decisions around all your financial affairs than you did before you work with us. And it's not going to be me telling you you're making better decisions. It'll be you a year from now telling me I'm making better decisions. But the no surprises one is the one that always catches financial advisors off guard. So I explain to clients, I pledge the outcome for you will be there will be no financial surprises that could have been avoided by proper planning. So no client calls in and says, oh, I had a big tax surprise, because we will give the client their money back. We come from an industry of financial advisors where they don't use the word guarantee. They don't even say it in a sentence. They won't even guarantee that they'll return your phone call. They don't guarantee anything because they're trained not to. So we change all that. We explain, don't sell your services, money management, tax services, whatever it is. That's just a list of services. What inspires clients is the outcomes. So you tell someone that they have shared their values, they've shared their goals, and you're telling them you'll always be on track, because if you're not, we will pull you in and give you the recommendations to get you back on track. Those are the four expectations, and those are the three outcomes that really move the relationship.
And you can apply that to any industry in whatever appropriate way. It will separate the men from the boys.
Something somebody said, I think it was you, Perry, somebody said in one of the roundtable early sessions, like talking about this skin in the game, you'll accomplish what I say, or I'll give you a free Tesla. So I started training my advisors. They push back on this promising of anything, like pledge. I don't pledge. I pledge nothing. So we have to get over that hump. I say, let me show you how bad this is. I want you to send out an email to your three best clients and say, I'm making a pledge that when you call in, you'll either get us on that call, or we will return your call in 2 hours, or I'll buy you a Tesla. We started having financial advisors, and the reaction is, I can't promise that. I can't promise that. I say, yes, you can. You're just promising a service guarantee. It has nothing to do with the markets. Of course you can, but it makes the point, Perry. It makes the point.
Wow. That's amazing. And so just to kind of land the plane here, you're teaching financial advisors the process that you mostly described how you ran your own business. Now you are teaching financial planners to do what you did.
Mm-hmm.
You are challenging them to put their balls in a wheelbarrow and guarantee, we'll call you back or I'll buy you a Tesla, which means their systems have to be spick and span. They can't have clients all over the place that they can't keep track of. They have to be on top of their game. And then when they are on top of their game, their clients like them so much that they refer other clients. And now they don't have to spend their time marketing. They can spend their time servicing clients. And it's just a virtuous circle. Have I understood this right?
Absolutely. That's the other thing I did this year in Roundtable. I could go on and on. We were envisioning 5 membership levels to learn what you just said. In Roundtable, it became clear to me there's really just 2 programs. You're either in action mode, and that's $3,200 a month. I'll work with you. You'll get this done, or I'll give you your money back. Or you're in get ready to take action mode. And I've got a program for that. It's all self-paced training videos. It doesn't involve me. I'm fine. If people if they're in information mode or learning mode, that's fine. But that clarified the why. Like if you're in action mode, I'll work with you. You have to commit that you are willing to make the effort to become a star, a little star in your community. But if not, you can still learn everything in my process. I hide nothing. So here's the whole thing for people that are just kicking the tires. So that right there really simplified our communication with clients and really what we deliver to our clients.
Well, the members of Roundtable 2025 get to hang out with Mark and get exposed to his energy and his wisdom. And we're taking applications. The first meeting is in the last week of January, and we're onboarding people right now. So we do a whiteboard session. If you're accepted, we're starting right away, and we will start turning your business around, skin in the game, both directions. And we're only taking people that we can really move the needle. So if you want to see if you could be a fit, perrymarshall.com/elite, and you'll be in a very elite group of people.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to say real quick, for those of you that aren't sure whether this is going to be a fit, you're on the fence. I'm putting my cell phone number down below. That is my actual cell phone number. Please don't abuse it. You can give me a call and ask if I feel it's appropriate. That's literally my job. I've been doing it for going on 8 years now. And I want to make sure everyone is able to move forward confidently, because that's how we're building the system to be done. Mark, I look forward to hanging out with you in January. And everybody else, thank you so much.
And how many of you in the chat felt like Mark did mic drop moment multiple times today? Like, was this awesome or what?
Well, and I appreciate the time, Kyler and Perry, because I didn't have an opportunity like I did today to really say how grateful I am for this program, and grateful to Perry, but Kyler and Emily, the whole Roundtable team is really responsible for my transformations this year. So thanks for giving me a forum to say thank you. I really
what a beautiful hour we spent with you. Appreciate everybody. See you guys. Thank you, Mark.
Well, if you watched the whole interview, you now know that we've made a decision. We're only going to work with the number one financial advisor in each market. We will work with an advisor who is not number one if they can convince me that it's their goal within 12 months to take over the number one spot. I'm happy to work with people like that as well. If you have any interest in our programs or working with me, if you're in action mode and you're either number one in your market, or you would like to be number one in your market and you're willing to go into action mode to get it done, then let's talk. I would like to see if you could persuade me that you're going to actually pull it off. Of course, if I can give you any advice along the way, then I hope I can. So I'll put a link. It's themarkofmastery.com. That's my website, themarkofmastery.com. You should go there regardless, because there's videos, free courses, everything that I have implemented is addressed in that site at no charge. But if you want to talk to me, go to themarkofmastery.com/talk. We'll set up a time. I call it a business management assessment. You just walk me through your vision of your ideal business. We'll see how much advice I can give you in 1 hour's time. If you want to check out our programs, you can. If not, I wish you all the best in your career. If you're out to be number one, we should talk.